Under federal regulations, commercial fleets are required to operate with a specific safeguard in place to prevent accidents. Supervisors are legally obligated to recognize the signs of driver impairment and intervene before a safety-sensitive vehicle enters the road. This chart visualizes over 4,000 DOT violations issued between 2021 and 2025 related to this exact mandate. Segmented by cause, an expansive pattern emerges. Notice this dominant segment. These violations weren't issued for incorrect judgment calls. They were issued because supervisors lacked required training. The federal regulation exists to force a mandatory procedural link between human observation and operational safety. It ensures that when a supervisor notices something wrong, there is an established mechanism to remove a driver from duty immediately. Operating a CDL program without trained supervisors bypasses this mechanism entirely. It leaves the fleet exposed to immediate legal liability and places the public at severe physical risk. The mechanism to remove a driver is governed by 49 CFR 382.307. This federal regulation dictates that any reasonable suspicion determination must be based on exact observational categories rather than subjective interpretation. The regulation explicitly requires that evidence be specific. A supervisor cannot order a test based on a gut feeling, a rumor, or an instinct. The evidence must be grounded in concrete physical details. Stating that a driver seemed a little off today fails the specificity test. Stating that the driver was swaying while standing still and exhibited heavily bloodshot eyes provides the exact mechanical details required. The observation must also be contemporaneous. Supervisors are restricted to documenting what is happening during the current duty period. Memories of a driver acting strangely last week or patterns of past behavior are entirely invalid for today's determination. Finally, the observation must be legally articulable. If a supervisor cannot translate the visual data they process into plain, specific written language, they lack the grounds to mandate a test. Enforcing these precise definitions serves a dual purpose. It gives employers a clear standard to enforce, and it explicitly protects commercial drivers from being subjected to arbitrary discipline or personal grievances dressed up as safety concerns. Adhering to this specific legal lexicon strips the emotion out of the process, transforming a subjective suspicion into a rigid, objective, and legally insulated decision. Translating that observation into action requires a strict three-step procedural chain. Step 1 demands direct personal observation of the diver by a supervisor who has completed the mandated training. This requirement leaves no room for secondhand reports from dispatchers, hearsay from coworkers, or reviewing security footage after an incident has already occurred. The trained supervisor must witness the behavior firsthand. Step 2 is optional under the law, but highly recommended in practice, pulling in a second trained supervisor to observe the same situation independently. Having two individuals process the same visual data provides a critical, immediate check on individual bias, ensuring that the observation is rooted in fact rather than an isolated misinterpretation. A second trained observer completing a separate evaluation drastically strengthens the evidentiary weight of the final documentation, creating a highly defensible record for the employer. Step 3 is the formal documentation. The complete written record must be generated and filed within exactly 24 hours of the observation, or before the test results are returned, whichever happens first. If an observation fails to survive any part of this three-step chain of custody, it cannot be used as actionable evidence. The procedure must be flawless to legally authorize a test. The first category of actionable evidence covers physical indicators. These are the direct, surface-level biological signs that a body is operating in an altered state. In a CDL context, supervisors are trained to look for pupil anomalies, whether dilated or constricted, along with flushed or unusually pale skin, visible hand tremors, unsteady balance, or excessive sweating without an environmental cause. This split-screen logic tree maps how different chemical categories force the body to react. Stimulants, like amphetamines, drive the nervous system up, resulting in extreme agitation and dilated pupils. Depressants, like alcohol or opioids, push the system down, presenting as lethargy, drooping eyelids, and constricted pupils. But as this false positive wording illustrates, a single physical symptom rarely provides conclusive evidence. Bloodshot eyes can stem from allergies, and tremors may be a documented medical condition. Physical signs require corroboration. That corroboration usually comes from the second category, behavioral indicators. Instead of evaluating physical appearance, this category measures distinct changes in how a driver interacts with their environment. Red flags include unprovoked aggression toward coworkers, wildly erratic mood swings within a single conversation, or a state of inappropriate euphoria that does not match the workplace situation. Behavior cannot be measured against a universal standard. To be diagnostically valid, a behavioral indicator must represent a severe deviation from that specific driver's individual baseline. If a driver who is normally talkative and engaged arrives at the yard acting aggressively withdrawn and monosyllabic, that shift is highly significant. The indicator is the deviation itself. A supervisor is only equipped to recognize a baseline deviation if they regularly speak with their drivers during normal daily operations. Without that prior engagement, establishing a baseline is impossible. The third category covers speech indicators. Supervisors evaluate the mechanical execution of communication, specifically the pace, clarity, and logical tracking of a driver's sentences. Clear indicators include heavy slurring, unnaturally rapid or pressured speech, repeating the same phrase continuously, or disjointed answers that do not logically follow the question asked. Speech is a highly reliable diagnostic metric because fluent communication requires complex central nervous system coordination. It is a biological process that is incredibly difficult to mask with conscious effort when impaired. A routine 2-minute conversation at the start of a shift regarding the daily manifest is the most effective, non-confrontational method to check these speech parameters. The fourth category involves performance indicators. These are measurable, observable degradations in how a driver executes their routine daily job functions. Supervisors watch for drivers suddenly skipping mandatory pre-trip inspection steps, fumbling with familiar trailer couplings, or consistently misjudging standard clearances they normally navigate with ease. Looking at this simplified brain model, the mechanics behind these failures become clear. The cerebellum dictates the fine motor skills required for maneuvering, while the prefrontal cortex manages the procedural memory necessary to complete a sequential checklist. When an intoxicating substance disrupts these regions, highly automated practice tasks, like a daily pre-trip inspection, are the very first operational systems to degrade and fail. The regulations also explicitly identify body odor as a fifth observable metric. The distinct smell of alcohol or associated chemical odors on breath or clothing is entirely legitimate and unambiguous evidence. Because chemical impairment inherently disrupts these automated neural pathways, a driver attempting to consciously conceal their condition will inevitably fail. The biology always leaks through the performance. To maintain fairness, the regulations mandate a strict separation of powers. The supervisor who makes the reasonable suspicion determination is legally barred from being the person who actually administers the resulting test. This restriction prevents any single individual from holding unchecked authority over the testing process, eliminating the risk of a supervisor acting as both judge and executioner. Furthermore, the observations themselves are only valid if they occurred just before, during, or immediately after the period the driver is required to be in compliance and on duty. When it comes to documentation, the requirements are rigorous. The final report must specify exactly which of the 4 indicator categories were observed, the precise times they occurred, and the names of the observers involved. On a document like this observation form, vague language is heavily penalized. Writing that a driver seemed impaired is procedurally useless. The form demands literal, objective descriptions, stating clearly that a driver slurred their words, swayed backward, or exhibited dilated pupils. Rigorous, plain language documentation serves as an unbreakable shield, protecting the employer from legal liability while simultaneously ensuring the driver's rights are respected. The regulations include one unique, aggressive protection specifically regarding suspected alcohol misuse. If a driver exhibits documented behavioral, speech, or performance indicators of alcohol impairment, they must be removed from safety-sensitive duty immediately, even before a physical test can be administered. This timeline graphic maps the exact protocol. The driver must remain off-duty until an alcohol test returns a result below 0.02 or until exactly 24 hours have elapsed since the initial observation. This dual-path safeguard protects the public by forcing immediate removal based on observation, while also capping the driver's penalty time if the company ultimately fails to conduct a test. The entire structure, from recognizing a baseline deviation in speech or performance, to securing a second observer, to filing the 24-hour documentation, is designed to eliminate guesswork. Reasonable suspicion training does not ask supervisors to police the personal lives of their drivers. It asks them to execute a precise, legally mandated protocol to guarantee the safety of their operations.